Oh, thank you. I see that Marlis has just hit the recording button. So we will go ahead, and it's 3:02 and I'll call the meeting to order. Can we go around and do introductions? I'll start. I'm Ann Kish, Commission Chair.
Bruce Newell, Commissioner.
Jamie Doggett, Commissioner.
And we have Bruce Newell.
This is Amelia from the State Library.
I know we have Ken Wall. It looks like he's muted. And I'm Jenny Stapp, the State Librarian.
And everybody else is able to unmute themselves, right? If they would like to. I would say we could go in picture order, but I think everybody's picture order is different.
Right, and Erin is joining us now.
Oh, great. Hi, Erin. We're doing introductions.
And this is Tracy from the State Library.
Hi, Tracy.
This is Kara Urban from the State Library.
Hi, Kara.
Jennifer Burnell from the State Library.
Hi, Jennifer. We do have Ashley, whose mic isn't working, and she's with the New Media Broadcasters in Havre. I see Evan.
Evan Hammer, State Library.
Hi.
And then Melissa Williams with the State Library.
This is Jessica Edwards from the State Library.
Hi, Jessica. And I see Elsie is, Superintendent Arntzen is connecting right now. I also see Erin Fashway.
Yep, this is Erin Fashway, State Library.
Elsie, we're doing introductions if you want to unmute and introduce. Okay, have I missed anybody?
We have a couple of guests. We have Denise Ard from the North Valley Library District. Denise, I apologize if I got the name of your district wrong. And Samuel Scott is from Missoula. He's one of the applicants from the MLIAC grant program.
Oh, great. Thanks for coming. Okay, thank you for coming, everyone. So we're going to start with our first agenda item, which is the FY 2021 Montana Land Information Act Grant Awards. Erin Fashway is going to talk to us about that, and then we'll call for public comment, and this is an action item, so we'll take a vote following discussion and comment. So Erin, would you like to?
Sure, good afternoon. I didn't know if someone wanted to share the memo, or should I?
Let's see, I
It'd be
can
helpful to share it, yes.
let me go ahead and do that a minute, if I can.
So while Jenny is pulling that up, just to recap, the council met, the Montana Land Information Advisory Council met this past week on Wednesday, and and had taken action on prioritizing the funding for the FY 2021 Montana Land Information Act Grant Program. So this memo that we have created for the commission basically outlines, I guess, the main points that we wanted to communicate regarding the grant program. There were total of 11 applications. I think it's coming. Those of you that can see it, there we go. Thank you, Jenny. So there were a total of 11 applications reviewed by the MSL staff internally first, and then given to the Land Information Act Grant Subcommittee, or Council Subcommittee, And we kind of had to take a different approach this year because of the COVID response and the lack of being able to get together. We were supposed to have met and taken action on the grants in conjunction with the Big Sky GeoCon, but unfortunately, since that was canceled, we just had to regroup. And I think even though we couldn't meet in person, I think we did a good job of evaluating the grants given the situation and circumstances. So there was like I said, a request for funding that, well, let me take a step back. There were a total of 11 applicants that requested funding, and the council had prioritized giving some sort of funding to all 11. Some you can see in the stipulations and recommendations where there were some stipulations put on a few of these grants. And then if there weren't any stipulations, we marked them as fully fund. So basically, some of the reasons why there were stipulations put on is because the council didn't think that the project could be completed within the given timeline, or it didn't match the some of the, I guess, tasks or deliverables weren't in line with the priority set forth by the land information plan. And then some, there was one where we didn't think, the council, excuse me, didn't think that there was enough funding requested. And so since they had the ability to kind of give a little more, they decided to fully fund the entire grant, which would include the match, so that they could, I guess, leverage the program to complete the project on time, and then to, I guess, the standards that we had set forth in the land information plan. And so those are basically 7 through 10. Those are the 4 grants that did see some sort of stipulation attached to it. And I can talk a little bit about some of these applications and projects if you would like me to go into further detail. There was a total budgeted amount, as in previous years, $250,000 for the grant program, and this year the approved amount is $162,198. So a little bit of a difference there, but I think that, you know, it will be these grants are going to be really fantastic projects. I'm really looking forward to the 2 pilot project grants to partner with the State Library in the Geo-enabled elections project that we're working on with the Secretary of State's office. So I think they're going to be great grants, and they're going to further the MLIA and the MSDI. So we're looking forward to working with the grant recipients, and I would ask that you, or we would recommend the approval based on what the council had approved for funding.
Thanks, Erin. Before we get to public comment, does anybody have any questions for Erin or for anybody else, or any points of discussion?
This is Jamie. I would move that we approve the proposed requests.
This is Bruce. I second.
Do we have any public comment first? Any further discussion? Okay, well, we have a motion on the table and a second, so I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Any recusals, please recuse.
This is Ken. I'm recusing.
Thank you. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. And thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
looks like a lot of work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Erin. And our congratulations to the grant recipients.
Yes, thank you. We're going to work to get these projects committed pretty quickly. And then I was wondering, I have to jump on another call. Jenny, do you need me further in the meeting?
I don't think so. Thanks, Erin. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks. All right, we'll move on to our second agenda item, which is also an action item. It's the COVID-19 related funding recommendations. Jenny's going to tell us about those, and then we'll ask questions, take public comment, and then I'll call for action.
Okay, great. So as is said in the memo, we received notice from the Institute of Museum and Library Services on April 13th that the CARE Act, the federal stimulus funding, included the total award for libraries in that bill was $50 million to IMLS. And IMLS is awarding those funds about $30 million through the Grants to States program, which is our Library Services Technology Act funding program, and then the remaining funds largely through competitive grants. So of that $30 million, the State Library in Montana is receiving $96,573. Those funds were awarded just solely based on a per capita award, so non-competitive. But unlike our normal LSTA award, it also doesn't include a base amount per state. That 30 million was awarded completely based on a per capita formula. We have until September 30th of 2021 to spend those monies. We have to spend them in accordance with our Library Services Technology Act 5-year plan. And then IMLS gave us some additional guidance on the priorities for how to spend those funds, which I've included in your cover memo. Additionally, we have some Library Services Technology Act FY 2019 funds, about $45,000 that we're projecting, and some additional year-end funds within our own budget, particularly related to some positions that we didn't fill until later in the year. So in total, we're projecting that we have about $290,000 to spend to help libraries during this period of time. We held a meeting with the Network Advisory Council last Thursday to talk about the recommendations for how we use these funds. And what's reflected in your memo are the recommendations from the Network Advisory Council to the Commission for spending out these monies. I've included some additional information in your memo about when the remaining funds need to be expended. The NAC made, they took the recommendations motion by motion. So each of the 4 recommendations reflects a separate motion that was made to the Network Advisory Council. So I don't know, Anne, if you would prefer to take them all as one motion, or if you would prefer to act on them individually. I think that's up to the Commission. But at this point, I thought I would just walk through each of the 4 recommendations, and then the Commission could discuss how they might want to approach the different recommendations. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes, it's my thought that we act on all of them as one, but if in discussion we see that there's that somebody has a different idea, then we can go ahead and split them up.
Great. So the first recommendation is that we spend $10,000 to procure upgraded Wi-Fi routers for a close to 40 libraries. These libraries were identified in our Gigabit Toolkit evaluation as having outdated equipment and unreliable broadband. So the recommendation is that we purchase these routers for those libraries to help them extend their internet access largely outside of their facilities so that it could be accessible on the premises around the library, either in the parking lot or in the building grounds. And then when those libraries reopen, that of course it would improve the internet access within the facility itself. So that funding allocation recommendation from the NAC is $10,000. Amelia Kim is joining us to talk about the next recommendation a little bit more. We've heard a significant need from libraries for a reading system, an online reading system that would particularly support the summer reading program. Of course, summer reading programs are sort of the bread and butter of many public libraries. During the summer, it's the time when libraries offer services to help encourage reading and to prevent the summer slide. And with the social distancing requirements and the limiting of the size of the groups that can gather, libraries recognize that they need to be able to support this kind of programming in an online system. Staff evaluated a couple of different programs that can be used for these kinds of online reading services. The state has an exception to the state procurement process that allows us to go through a rapid contract through the exigency program. So we have the ability to enter into a contract quickly based on recommendations and evaluation from the staff. So that would be a process depending on the commission action today. What's recommended by the Network Advisory Council is that we enter into a contract with a company called Read Squared for 2 years that would allow libraries to take advantage of the service for 2 summer periods. It is a program that's available year-round, but would cover 2 summer periods for as many as 40 libraries each summer at a total estimated cost of $25,000. I've included a link to Read Squared in your memo. And again, Amelia's joined us to give us just a little bit more information about what that service looks like for libraries. Amelia?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jenny. So yes, the 2 products that we looked at were Read Squared and Beanstack. And they're both essentially the same. And they're online reading tracking programs. So we're all still a little bit unsure what summer reading is going to look like this summer, depending on how things work out with COVID. And so a lot of people, I believe, are planning, will have multiple plans, but are probably planning on doing a combination of maybe in person if they can, but mostly online. And so Read Squared and Beanstack are programs that can help do this. And the basic function is that it eliminates the need for the librarian to track people's reading. Both Read Squared and Beanstack and all these kinds of software, you can download an app to your phone and you can enter in and keep track of your own reading progress. So whether the library tracks pages, minutes, books, or whatever, the patron themselves, they just have to sign up for the program, which is free, and then they enter in information through their phone or through the website to track where they are with their summer reading. And depending on the library, the nice thing about these programs is that they're very customizable. So the library themselves can set if they want to track minutes, pages, whatever, and then they can input their own milestones. If they do prizes, they can input their own levels for when people receive prizes. They can also do additional materials such as adding in challenges for patrons to do, like identifying a plant or taking a picture somewhere, and they can include that into their program. But the main function is eliminating the need for paper logs, although I have heard of some libraries doing paper logs in addition to the online logs, and making it such that people can track their own reading without having to come to the library and turn in those logs. And you can still also organize like community challenges without people coming into the library and removing the need for large gatherings of people. So there's a variety of other different functions that Read Squared and Beanstack and all these other programs can do. Like I said, they're very customizable, and you can access them through your phone as well as through a web browser. But yes, are there any questions about those?
This is Bruce. I do have a question. Amelia, I understand that you've had a lot of interest in this. Was the interest from big and small libraries, north, south, east, west, et cetera?
Yeah, so let me pull up the list of interested libraries. So there were a few big libraries. So actually a couple libraries already have a contract with these kinds of software. So Lewis and Clark Library already has a contract with Beanstack. The Billings Public Library already has a contract with Read Squared. And then there was interest from pretty much all over the state, from the big libraries, but also from the smaller libraries as well. And I feel like there would be more people who are interested once they find out that, you know, the cost to them, their library will be fairly minimal, if not maybe $0. And especially as we receive more guidance on what's safe and what libraries should do for summer reading, and more conversation happens around that, I think that's pushing more people towards considering this as well. So I can send you the list if you'd like to look at all of the different libraries, but it's about 22 of them total who specifically expressed interest to me, and I think there might be more as well.
Yeah, thanks. I don't need to see a list. Are we considering charging some sort of a fee for the use of this service?
I am not sure. Some people have asked that of me, and I said that was still under discussion. With the price that was listed in the memo, that would cover all of the fees for all 40 libraries for 2 years with Read Squared. So the libraries would not have to pay anything. But I wasn't sure if that was the model that we wanted to pursue, or if we were thinking of discussing other options.
I think that there are some policy implications in charging. I guess I don't know if we need to make a change in the recommendation, but it'd be nice if we sort of somehow baked into this the idea that these 40 applications are sort of a 2-year demonstration, and they'd be provided free, and then we'll reassess.
Bruce, that would be my intent. I would not want to charge libraries for this service, and I certainly think it can be a demonstration. We had originally, or I had recommended to the NAC that they perhaps think about increasing the number of libraries for the second year, assuming that the first year is successful and additional libraries want to join. I think that's something that we could think about for next year as well. Having the contract flexible enough that we could add libraries if we see interest beyond the 40. But I wouldn't want to charge libraries for a number of reasons, not only the costs to them, but also the added workload on our staff.
So this is Elsie. When it comes to this model, it's a subscription model. So I'm understanding then what Bruce had said, that it might be a trial and error. But if you go ahead and you work with a company and you don't go out on a competitive process and you do the trial and error, pretty much I believe you would be opening up the library for a risk if you didn't do the competitive process. Within the time frame that you've got, Jenny, do you have to go outside that procurement and use that emergency? Because again, come back to that, since you are only on a 2-year basis and you've got the possibility for a trial and run error, and you're marketing for a company here, and if there's others in that space, I wouldn't want to hold the state library or the state of Montana in any kind of a risk look.
That's a good point, Elsie. There was several considerations that we made when looking at the 2 primary options that other states are considering. First and foremost, Beanstack just can't work with our timeline. We would have had to commit to a contract by April 14th for them to be able to roll out to Montana libraries. And we only received word of the funding on April 13th. So the earliest we've been told they could possibly roll out for Montana libraries is July. And that's just far too late for summer reading programs. So the primary reason why we would need to go with the exigency exception is that the timeline is such that we just couldn't get the system up and running by a June 1st start date.
Thank you.
So Jenny, in other terms, does that mean that Read Squared is in essence a sole provider?
Sole source.
There's an exception for these kinds of circumstances. The last time we used that exception was when the previous courier went out of business on short notice, and we needed to find a courier very quickly. And so the state procurement process allows us to go through this kind of situation. Certainly, if this became a long-term program that we wanted to sustain or have some kind of statewide contract for, at that time we would go through a competitive procurement process.
I'll be interested a year from now seeing if all 40 slots were taken up, and if there was interest in expanding that number. I'd be interested in seeing how libraries are using it and the degree to which they're using it for possibly some cooperative kinds of things. And at that point, we'll have enough information that we could write a standard request for proposal and kind of run that kind of stuff through. So I assume that we'd be reviewing this in a year with an eye towards calling it quits after 2 years or extending it.
That's correct.
Am I making the correct assumption?
Yes. Are there any more questions about the summer reading system? The third recommendation is to put $96,000 into the Montana Library to Go content budget. And I've included information in your memo that links out to the statistics so that you have a sense for the increased use of that service. You can see the increased number of both people signing up for the service through their libraries. There's an online registration option that's been well used, as well as the significant increase in the number of items placed on hold. As you all know, there's much more demand for this kind of e-content than there is for actual content available. And so one of the primary concerns, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, are libraries' abilities to provide enough content to meet the demand, as is reflected in the number of holds that we see for titles. And that demand and the number of titles has only significantly increased as a result of the pandemic. And so this is a way for us to try to address that concern by increasing the amount of funds that are available to significantly increase the amount of content available. And the recommendation there is for $96,000 to go to Montana Library to Go, and that the content be purchased in accordance with Montana Library to Go's collection development policy and processes.
Jenny, I had a question about this one. How we have the money this year to increase this content, and then we won't have it next year unless it comes from another source. So how is there a plan for bumping up the content and making sure everybody knows that that's temporary, or does that money just sort of go to the Montana Library to Go executive board and they decide how they're going to deal with that?
So the money would go to actually procure the content. So that content would be available from now into the future, depending on the licensing terms of the content that's actually procured. So while there might not be as much funding in the future for content, users wouldn't necessarily see a decline in the amount of content that's available of course, if usage continues to go up and up as we've seen, any amount of funding probably isn't enough to keep up with that kind of demand. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just concerned that we would see an increase in content for a short period of time, and then we would see a decrease, and there, you know, that would cause some problems. But it sounds like you're saying that the Montana Library to Go Executive Board would license content that they would have for a longer period of time than a year.
It depends on the publisher. The publishers have different terms for how long that content is licensed.
Okay.
And
This-
Kara is available
this is-
if you have more specific questions.
This is Bruce, if I may. So I would like these statewide monies, it'd be explicitly understood that these statewide monies would allow, if they wish, all Montana libraries to join this Montana Library to Go for this year, and without a charge on the part of some of the smaller libraries that are joining. I said that poorly. My understanding is there's about 5 libraries who are not currently a member of Montana Library to Go. It'd be great to make this sort of a short period where all of those libraries, if they wish, could join in on the statewide effort.
Yes, and we have extended that invitation to those libraries. Some of those libraries are in areas where their patrons have the opportunity to sign up for a card at another library in the county, such as in Fergus County. There are a few libraries that are smaller and not formally members of Montana Library Go, but their patrons have cards at Lewistown, and so they're represented in those counts. But we have also reached out to those libraries directly and asked if they would like to join. And there is no startup cost per se, but there is an annual content fee that is collected from each library, and we have offered to waive those fees for new libraries this year.
Great. Thank you very much, Kara.
Thanks, Kara. Any more questions about Montana Library Go?
Yes, this is Erin. So I just wanted to make sure that it's also something, if there isn't a library that is opting into this, that everyone in Montana has the ability to sign up. So I don't know if that's making cooperative arrangements with libraries in different counties or, you know, nearby cities. But I think it would be something that would be really important, that everyone has the opportunity, even if their local library doesn't.
I can comment on this as well. We have, to the extent that we can, we have tried to make that possible. We have set up what is called the instant digital card option through our current vendor Overdrive, and this is supposed to allow residents to sign up using their cell phone number, and it will map them to an area code within Montana's boundaries, but it's not entirely successful. And so we have for shared catalog libraries, there's a secondary option where if somebody is within the district of a shared catalog library of any sort, they can sign up for an instant shared catalog card, which would provide them access to Montana Library to Go. And so those are the 2 options we have available to Montana residents at this time. To the extent possible, we are trying to extend access to all residents of Montana.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Hi, Jenny. This is Deb, and I apologize. I was late to the party because I was on another Zoom meeting, as we all are filled with Zoom meetings during the day anymore. But I just, is this what we were talking? You just need to kind of pull me up to date here. This is what we were talking about at the last meeting, correct?
Yeah,
This
Deb,
is
let's see. Maybe you could introduce yourself to the commission, and then Deb, there's going to be time for public comment after we walk through the memo and the commission has discussion.
Okay. I missed the whole beginning of the meeting. I apologize. This is Deb Mitchell. I'm with the Museums Association of Montana.
Glad you could join us. Are there more questions about the Montana Library to Go recommendation? The final recommendation from the NAC is to support a mobile hotspot demonstration project. They're recommending that we procure hotspots to be circulated by public libraries. The recommendation is twofold. The first amount of funding, up to $80,000, would fund 2 hotspots with a 1-year prepaid data plan for each public library. And then we would identify 10 libraries targeted based on need for additional hotspots at a total cost for the second portion of this recommendation, also at $80,000, for a total cost of $160,000. These libraries would then be able to make those hotspots available in locations within their community, such as a grocery store or another venue if senior centers open, those kinds of places, in a park, for example. They could also be checked out by their patrons. There are currently 4 libraries in the state that are circulating hotspots. The Lewis and Clark Library has the most experience with this. They're circulating 4 hotspots, and they've told us time and again that those hotspots don't stay on the shelves. They are in constant use and constant demand for people who are applying for jobs. In this case, they could be available where students need internet access for online learning. People are applying for jobs, meeting with their health providers via telemedicine appointments, trying to maintain online businesses, and so forth. I wanted to, let me share one more document with you. There's a couple of additional documents here. We did a survey early on of libraries who might be interested in this program, and I see I'm frozen. Is anybody else frozen? Okay. Can people still hear me okay?
You don't look frozen to us, Jenny.
Thank you. There is information here about libraries' responses to that survey. 56 libraries responded, and I think only about 4 or 5 of them said that they were not interested. We didn't hear back from all libraries. Some of that was because some of the libraries are closed at this time. And the document I wanted to share with you, Bruce made a great suggestion during the Network Advisory Council meeting when we were trying to think about what data we might use to evaluate need. Of course, there's many ways that we could think about some kind of need-based program. Bruce recommended that we look at free and reduced hot lunch as a measure of need. The reason why I really like that idea is because that's the same metric that's used for evaluating E-rate funding, the universal service funding source that helps schools and libraries provide affordable broadband. So it makes sense that we would think about using that same kind of metric. So staff put together this spreadsheet. We've had staff working on a number of different spreadsheets that looks at the free and reduced hot lunch numbers, and then we've married that with the percentage of broadband access in the county. And the data sources are linked on the second tab of that spreadsheet in your meeting materials. But you can see, if we look at some of the counties that have the most significant percentages of free and reduced hot lunch, and then marry that with the counties that have the lowest percentage of broadband, you can see I've kind of jumped over a few in here where they have a fairly significant amount of broadband. I share this information with you as an example of how we could identify those 10 libraries that could be our need-based participants. Not all of these libraries responded to the survey, so we'd have to do some outreach to them to find out if they would in fact be interested in participating in this kind of demonstration project or not. If they weren't, then we would go further down the list. But I think organizing a needs-based approach in this kind of manner makes a lot of sense. So again, the proposal is 2 hotspots per library, plus additional hotspots up to 8 per library in these needs-based areas. And we would create evaluation criteria to help us evaluate the impact of this kind of program. Certainly the kinds of output metrics like the number of times the hotspots have circulated to the number of people, trying to get some qualitative and outcome and impact data about why and how they use the hotspots and to what ends in their lives to understand how successful the program is. One point that was made during discussion at the Network Advisory Council meeting is that if a library finds that the hotspots are not circulating in their libraries, they would be happy to share those hotspots with another library that perhaps needed more. A little bit more information about this recommendation. The state has term contracts with the major cellular providers in the state. Very few of the local telecommunication providers are actually in the cellular business anymore. So the state has term contracts with T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. And we've also evaluated cellular coverage from those providers for each of the libraries, and would use the providers that provide the best coverage in those areas. The hotspots have to be SIPA compliant, the Child Internet Protection Act, because we're talking about using federal funds, and especially T-Mobile has the capacity to support SIPA compliance devices. We're working with Verizon as well. T-Mobile, when they acquired Sprint, acquired a service that Sprint used to offer, working with a company called Mobile Beacon. So they have a lot of expertise in providing this kind of service to libraries. So that's an overview of the 4 recommendations coming from the Network Advisory Council. I think these do a great job of meeting the immediate needs that we're seeing on the ground. This is a great way for us to get this money out the door and doing, I think, some real good in our communities, addressing some real needs that our libraries are seeing and asking for. So I'm pleased with these recommendations. As I said, we've been working to understand state procurement processes to make sure that that doesn't become a bottleneck. So again, we can get these services out the door as quickly as possible. And we're looking forward to learning a lot from them to better understand how we can support these kinds of programs in the future.
This is Bruce. I was part of the Network Advisory Council discussion. Was that earlier this week? No, it was late last week.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you kind of a short version of some of my thoughts about this, about the hotspots. It's kind of a new thing for the state library and libraries in general, but like Jenny says, there are some libraries who are distributing these and doing it so very successfully. You know, it'll be interesting to see if we adopt this, what we find out. This is sort of a demonstration, and it will be interesting to see if libraries generally, and if the state library has a role in helping assure sufficient access to e-resources in this way to Montanans. I can't imagine the hotspot scale to 1.06 million Montanans, but we should have some sense after we've done this of whether the libraries around the state did play a useful role, and maybe some guesses about how we would take and move forward with that, and what the state library's role would be.
Thanks, Bruce. Am I muted? No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to thank the Montana State Library staff and also the Network Advisory Council, because this all happened very quickly. And this was a lot of very high quality work that was done in a short period of time. And, you know, I'd like to emphasize that this funding had to be spent in a very specific way in accordance with our existing Library Services and Technology Act 5-year plan. So not only was the state library presented with this great opportunity to spend funding, but there were some very specific parameters in which they had to spend the funding. So I really appreciate everybody who's done the surveys, and Amelia, you know, looking into the different services, and just everybody who's participated in this. That was an amazing response rate from the libraries, who were mostly closed, conducting a survey. So I appreciate it very much. I think that this is a wonderful recommendation, and I would propose that we take it as one action. But if anybody would like to separate the 4 and take them as different actions, if any of the commissioners feel that way, please speak up.
How about this? I move that we accept this memo, all 4 recommendations, as one and as presented.
Is there a
This is
second?
Jamie. I second that motion.
Thanks, Jamie. And now I'd like to take there should be some further comment from the commissioners, but also from the public. Would anybody like to comment?
And this is Elsie. I apologize. Thank you. When it comes to, I know I've had people ask us, we're receiving $41 million of precious care dollars to come to our schools. And a lot of people have said, so what are you going to do with the dollars? So accounting for our 41 million, not in a blend, but in a pure line item, my suggestion to the commission, and I think it's wonderful that we are impacting with these 2 other additional budgets that are coming into play. But if a legislator was going to come and ask, what did you do with your $96,000 that you had right there? That pure accounting is going to be a little challenging. I think you can point to it, but I do believe there needs to be a more specific discussion around what did you expect to have from a Montanan to ask that question, but also don't know if the federal government's also going to require a look back on what was spent. And with the commingling, that might be a little bit more challenging. I'm sure that can be crafted, but just want to put that comment out there, some sort of a pure accounting method of what was spent of that $96,000.
That's a good point, Elsie. And as you know, we are required to spend all non-state funds first. That's one of the things that is a state requirement. It's something that we are audited on. And so in terms of these recommendations, we would spend those CARE Act funds first. I think your point is well taken to make sure that we're carefully accounting. I think Melissa would weigh in and say we would create projects for each of these so that we could show that we've spent those federal dollars, spent them first, show what we spent them on, and then the balance coming from our LSTA funds next, and then the remaining state dollars. Thanks.
Melissa, did you want to weigh in?
No, I think that Jenny's correct. The accounting system will allow for us to use different projects and subclasses, so we'll be able to account for each of those dollars separately.
Thank you, Elsie. That's a great consideration.
This is Jamie. I have a comment that I think that would benefit both sides, is if we get reports back from the libraries telling us how successful the program has been and how many participants. That's going to be a real step in justifying that the program was valid. So I'm sure that they're going to do that anyway, but I think that's a good positive step. Thank you.
We do have an online comment from Denise. Her board is enthusiastic about hotspots and hopes the commission will approve the hotspots. Putting money towards hotspots helps the have-nots and helps with the digital divide. Online digital resources help those with resources for internet connections, not those without. Many of those in our community come to our library for internet access and have no access at home. When we closed to the public because of COVID for physical holds pickup, we had 18 new users that signed up for Overdrive Montana Library to Go. Bozeman in that same time period had 262 new users and Missoula 186. I ran a report on April 16 to see how many checkouts our patrons had in the last 30 days. It was 151 checkouts. Last year during the same period, it was 128. So that is not a big increase. I believe those numbers not only reflect population, but the population's access to the internet. Thanks, Denise. Do we have any further comments?
This is Deb. I'm assuming this is when I can make
Please,
a comment.
please.
I'm not familiar with your procedure here. Is that
Please,
correct?
yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm with the Museums Association of Montana, and I just want you guys to keep in mind that these IMLS funds are for museums also, and just as you are passionate about your libraries, I am passionate about the museums, and I would love to see some sort of a partnership with this hotspot opportunity for museums, because there are many communities that have a museum but have no library, and they can be an opportunity to provide these hotspots for the community. And I think we need to keep museums in this discussion, because this money is meant, this CARE Act money is meant for museums also. So just FYI, and just want to keep that discussion going.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that point up and for coming to the meeting. I really appreciate it. I believe that this funding came through the IMLS to the Library Services and Technology Act. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of the public libraries to connect with their local museums. Hopefully, I know there are already a lot of existing relationships there. And I think that this would be a great opportunity for communities to take initiative to form even stronger connections with their museums.
And I would really, really, really love to work with you guys to see that happen. So, you know, I just don't want us to be left out of the discussion or out of the primary points of providing these hotspots.
Are there any further points of discussion or comments before I call for a vote?
I just want to say, I think with regard to Deb's suggestion, one of the real opportunities would be for a local library to circulate a hotspot to a museum. As Deb said, some of these museums don't have internet access as well. And there's no reason why a local library couldn't check out a hotspot or make the hotspot that they have available through a library, I think, or I'm sorry, through a museum. I think it's a great opportunity.
Okay, so the motion on the table, I'm sorry, Bruce, did you make the motion? Will you repeat it? Is it to approve?
It was basically to approve as the recommendations as spelled out in this memo and to approve them as one.
And we have a second on that, so I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Any recusals? Motion passes. And thank you for, this was a lot of work went into this proposal, and I appreciate all of the people who worked hard on this.
I really want to commend the staff as well, from conceiving the ideas to gathering the feedback to learning about these kinds of procurement processes. Staff are really pulling together to try to do something, and I think both meaningful and efficient. And I do want to make sure that you take a moment to look at some of the statistics that are linked from this memo, specifically with regard to Montana Library to Go, but staff are working hard to help us document the work that libraries are doing, the impact that we're having by collecting different kinds of statistics. Jessica's working on organizing different kinds of dashboards, looking at the different services that we are offering and that other libraries are offering, so that we have good data and information about the role that libraries are playing at this time.
This is Ken. I really, this is a great, the hotspot's a great idea. And I think that if we can urge libraries to capture some of the qualitative stories in addition to the metrics on this, it would be a great opportunity to kind of tell the story of the importance of this. It just lends the, it just shows how important libraries are in providing internet accessibility in particularly rural areas and to populations at risk.
All right, I will move us on to the next agenda item, which is reopening the Big Sky and how that impacts Montana State Library services. And Jenny's gonna speak to us about that.
So as you all know, the governor announced last week phase 1 reopening, which took effect yesterday and has some additional reopenings staggered over the next week or so. There was some follow-up communication from the Department of Administration's Director Lewis to state agencies. That direction is largely stay the course. If employees can continue to work from home and an agency can continue their business, they're encouraged to do so. And as you've heard me say, I think we've been incredibly successful in continuing our own services while staff are working remotely. We have one staff person, Martin Landry, who is coming in most days into the library, although he's doing some work from home as he's able to. He's continuing to manage the circulation of our Talking Book Library cassettes. From time to time, he's getting help from a couple of our other Talking Book staff on specific days where we're seeing heavier circulation. But beyond that, the staff are working remotely and working very successfully remotely. We are starting to have conversations with our leads about what it will look like for us to think about reopening the state library to the public. At this point in time, we're not ready to do that. We believe when the governor announces phase 2 of his reopening plan, that would be the time for us to bring staff back into the library and to then begin the process of opening back to the public. We're talking to staff about what they need to have in place in order to feel safe and secure while working. We anticipate that phase 2 will require some amount of social distancing to continue. So we're talking about things like potentially having some plexiglass in front of our reception desks and reference desks to provide that kind of barrier, having dedicated space for reference work that can be done, allowing for social distancing, closing certain doors so we don't have members of the public wandering through staff work areas, and those kinds of things. As we solicit feedback from staff, we can begin to plan. We need to better understand some of the directives from the governor, like what does it mean to assess staff's health? What kinds of cleaning and sanitation work are the cleaning crews being required to do in our facilities and that kind of thing, so that we can be prepared to reassure our staff, reassure patrons that are coming in. The volunteers were some of the first that we asked to stay home. They'll probably be some of the last that we invite back into the library, knowing that that's an elderly population that would be at risk. Right now, of course, the directive is that we limit travel to only essential travel, and all out-of-state travel has to be approved by the governor. I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon. So, and the direction is in phase 2 that we really have to evaluate essential travel at that time as well. So I doubt we'll be seeing a lot of staff traveling at this point. That's the nature of our discussions right now. We're certainly having a lot of discussions with libraries as they think about whether or not they should reopen or not. Some of the guidance that we're providing to them are some of the same things that we're thinking about. Can they reopen and still maintain the kind of social distancing necessary? Can they limit group sizes in the libraries to 10 people or fewer? Can they meet the health assessment and sanitation requirements? I think those are all really critical things for libraries to be thinking about right now as they make their own plans for a phased reopening.
This is Bruce. If I could bounce in here. I mean, most of the population, even though the governor is saying, let's look at opening up carefully, most of the population, of course, has not yet caught COVID-19 and is susceptible for catching it. Every one of the state library employees has got a social group and a family that could share the joy of COVID with he or she, and then have that come into the library and pass from staff to staff. I would hate to see that happen, as would I know you, Jenny. I think we should be extraordinarily cautious. The one thing the state library has the advantage of is many of our library functions, less library development, but many of our library functions can be done remotely. And both providing the content and services, but also protecting staff from infecting each other or the public. I think we need to be extraordinarily cautious. Now, I'm part of that elderly population. I would hate to be told by my state librarian that if I was working at the state library, that I could come into work. I don't know. It would make me damn nervous. And I think that most staff, I think we need to really protect our staff.
I couldn't agree more. You know, we were out ahead of this even before the announcements about this. We told staff that we're incredibly fortunate that we can be flexible in allowing them to work from home, and that we recognize that each one of them has their own unique circumstances, their own unique family situations, their own unique challenges in approaching this, and we plan to be as flexible and accommodating.
And we're going to be in the soup for over another year, according to many medical professionals. So I think we need to make long-range plans for both ensuring content and services, but also protecting staff.
If there's no more questions about our current status and planning process, I did have a few other updates I wanted to make, and I know we're at the top of the hour, so I'll try to keep this brief. Again, I mentioned all of the data that we're starting to collect relative to our services. I want to make you aware of those, and you can keep looking at that publications page. We'll be continuing to post more updated data there. Huge shout out to Erin Fashaway and our GIS techs that we hired for all of the work that they're doing to support the COVID-19 page, rolling out regular updates, continuing to collect new data to really help the state understand the nature of this emergency that we're in. We're just incredibly impressed with how well they're able to manage that process and the support that they're giving. There are a number of other things that continue to go on. As I said, we're continuing to be successful in our own work. We've made 2 hires of late. The first hire is the HR position that we'd planned to hire to help us with the administrative merger of the Heritage Program. We've hired a woman named Sharon Hardwick. We hired her from the federal court system, and she's going to start in that position on May 18th. Sharon worked for the federal courts for going on 20 years as their HR manager, and we feel really fortunate to have hired her. And then we're hiring our new network system administrator IT lead, a gentleman by the name of Lee Fossum. He has also about 20 years working for state government, about 17 at the Department of Environmental Quality, and most recently at the Department of Justice. And he'll join us on May 11th. So it'll be interesting to see how we go through the process of onboarding new staff while working remotely. So we're planning for that process. Our next meeting of the legislative subcommittee that's looking at the state library budget has been postponed until June. I don't have an exact date yet in June, but that meeting will occur in June. So I'll let you all know when that next meeting is scheduled.
Jenny, what was the date of the meeting that is being canceled?
Originally, we had been told that there would be a meeting in early May, and
Okay.
the committee is taking smaller their agenda in kind of smaller chunks. So we will not have a meeting in early May. It's going to be pushed off until June.
Okay.
I haven't heard yet. Our proposal for the administrative merger of the Heritage Program, I heard from OCHI, I think it was the week before last. They didn't have any recommended changes at this point in time, but said that it's in legal review on their end. So we hope to hear back from them soon. And then the procurements that we've been talking about continue. The staff and libraries have been reviewing the proposals that came into through the procurement process for Montana Library to Go. They've narrowed that process down to 3 potential vendors and are going through the process of demonstrations with those vendors, and so getting closer to moving to contract there. The proposals for a content management system for the Montana Memory Project, we extended the deadline for those proposals a couple weeks because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It closed today, and we have 7 respondents to that RFP, so I'm glad for that one. And then we're continuing to try to get some data from OCLC to help us evaluate a contract with them for interlibrary loan and cataloging. So all of that work continues. The other final announcement I wanted to make is that given the cancellation of the Montana Library Association conference and moving of some Federation meetings to an online form, those forums haven't allowed for as much public comment as we planned for the Public Library Standards comment period. So Tracy and I have scheduled 4 online public comment meetings. We've gone through 2 of them so far. We have 2 more scheduled. We have staff as well as members of the Public Library Standards Task Force attending those meetings. They've been well attended and we're getting good public comment through them. And then we have a meeting coming up, I can't remember now if it's later this week or next week, with tribal libraries to also talk to them about the impact of public library standards for tribal libraries. So I do anticipate bringing the comments we've received to date to a meeting of the Public Library Standards Task Force at the end of May and recommended changes based on the feedback that we've heard to your June commission meeting. I think those are all the updates that I have for you today.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny, and I really appreciate everyone for attending. I'd like to take a minute for to offer public comment time on any matter that's not contained in this agenda, but that's within the jurisdiction of the State Library Commission. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I think Evan.
Yeah. Sorry, I know you guys are trying to get wrapped up, going a little long, and I'll try to keep this quick and brief. But I did want to just recognize, all the staff and the great work they've done remotely to continue to make our services available. Can't say enough about them. And while I wish I had time to go through person by person and say something good right now, I do want to point out a couple of groups or people really quickly. The IT group, to be able to do the kind of remote support that they've been doing for our staff has been amazing. That's part of what has made it possible, as well as our admin group as well, just to keep things going. Erin Fashaway that spoke earlier, this is always the busiest time of year for her, January through April, with the grant cycle going on. On top of that, she's got 2 new employees and she's coordinating the COVID mapping. I just think it's amazing the work that she's been able to do and still get her regular work done there. And then the Talking Book Library, I shared with Jenny earlier today a message I sent to our NLS contact, just how proud I was of the work that they've been doing. They're one of a minority of talking book libraries to be open right now. There are 54 talking book libraries across the country that are completely closed, and another 34 that are partially open. And we're technically partially open, but we're still providing all the services to our patrons that we would normally provide. There are a couple things like we can't do recordings right now, and we can't do walk-in service, but we're still getting the books out. So just great work that I feel like needs to be brought up and brought to your attention. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Evan. There's just, the state library staff prove all of the time how wonderful they are, but this is a extraordinary circumstance to be proving
Absolutely.
in a whole new way.
And again, I'm sure I could pull out 3 or 4 more other groups and go on just as gush about them just as well, because there's so much thanks to them.
Mm-hmm. I'll share one more, and Tracy will correct me if I get this slightly wrong, but I think it was following our COVID-19 check-in last week. In that evaluation, libraries said that they knew that the state library supported them with our whole hearts.
Thank you for sharing that.
This is Ken. I'd like to add one more kudo to Evan and Erin for a great presentation, a couple of presentations at the MLIA meeting last week by Mary Craigle, Census and Economic Information Center. They're both a bit depressing in terms of how the census is going and how the COVID pandemic has kind of interrupted that process a bit. We're very low in Montana right now with self-reporting on the census, and then secondly, she gave an incredible report on differential privacy, which I think she's presented to the commission on the census, but I think the differential privacy is protections the Census Bureau is putting in after the fact that's going to dramatically affect, I think, grants and things coming to the state. So it'd really be good to get more information on that, I think, for the commission in future meetings. It was a great presentation, although it was very scary and depressing, the results of it. But.
Thanks, Ken.
Noted, Ken.
Do we have any other business or announcements that anybody at all would like to bring up? All right, then I will close the meeting, and thank you all for your attendance and participation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Be well.